Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For your first-time viewers out there, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting guests about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that they have decided to talk about. Now, my guest this evening is Mike Hasty, who was on 2 or 3 or 4 months ago talking about the Viet Nam era and all sorts of things associated with that. He's a fantastic photographer, and his whole personal history is one of real interest. And that's why we asked him to come on again for a second hour, because he has so many photographs he's taken about those kinds of things until we barely touched them last time. So let's see if we can talk some more about his photographs and his memory and history of that era and what's going on here. Mike, thanks again for coming on.
Pleasure, Don. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And that shirt you're wearing is Veterans for Peace?
Yes, it's a national organization. We've got about the membership of about 6,000 people, and we've got chapters in every state in the U.S. to include one in Vietnam, one in London, and there's one in Canada. So
chapters in those locations too?
Yes, there are Veterans for Peace individual chapters. I'm a member of our chapter here in Portland, which is chapter 72.
Do you know that I'm a member too?
Yes.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah. So how are you feeling right now?
Well, I'm feeling fine. I'm just, I always look forward to our conversations. I know you've had me on before, and I take a great interest in the projects that you've been involved in, and I want to thank you so much for, for bringing, these interesting stories to the public eye.
Thank you very much. It makes me feel good.
Good.
And I was nervous a few minutes ago. Now I'm less nervous, knowing that I got that fine praise from you. Yeah. So let's get started here. As the viewers know, and my shows usually go in 2 major segments. The first segment is what I call the Who Are You, our bio segment, where we talk about who you are personally and those kinds of things. And we also will touch on some of the things that we'll talk about Vietnam and that era, but that'll be mostly in the second half, because you have a whole collection of photographs and pictures that you're taking here. And there are some marvelous stories associated with those pictures. So let's get going here. So I'm going to do it again. This is the second show we've done this evening about a modeling of the Who Are You segment. And I'll volunteer who I am and just read a brief write-up here, but I'll be asking you questions specifically about your childhood and your life. Now, my personal stuff. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, of red, white, and black Roman Catholic parentage on December 26, 1928. Today I am a-religious and accepting of all others. I'm a retired PhD clinical psychologist and present-day television broadcast journalist. I'm the 12th of 12 children. I'm married, and I am the father of 5 daughters by a first marriage. Politically, I'm a progressive populist activist, still learning how to live lovingly. That's my lifelong goal. A few of my heroes include Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and any other fellow human who is currently living lovingly. That's who I am. Now we're going to ask you about who you are, but I've been doing this a long time, so I can rattle it off like that. And your full name is?
Well, full name is Richard Michael Hasty, but I've always gone by Mike or Michael. It was named after my father's father, my grandfather, but I've always gone by Mike. Yeah.
And people have always called you Mike?
Yeah, Mike or Michael.
They ever called you anything else you can't repeat now?
That's right. But I really don't respond to the name Richard. I really don't. So, but.
And if I were to ask your best friend, who is Mike, what would your best friend say? Be your best friend. Mike is what?
Well, I think
Be him.
I mean, if I was going to describe myself.
No, I don't want you to describe yourself. I want your friend, the best friend, to describe you. Mike is what?
I think that friend would say that I have a great passion to tell the truth based on my experiences, and to bear witness to those who cannot speak about the events and experiences that I certainly came out of as far as the Vietnam War is concerned. We know that 58,000 Americans were killed in Vietnam. Probably as many as that were probably committed suicide. And, God only knows how many Vietnam vets have destroyed their lives with drug addiction, alcoholism, and were never able to really talk about their experiences and bear witness to the public about what really happened in Vietnam.
How long ago was that? That was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I went in the military in 1969, did my basic training in Fort Lewis, and then from there I did my medic training in Fort Sam Houston in Texas, and then I did an additional schooling, which was a year course. It was a clinical specialist course in Denver, Colorado. And
medical specialist, medical?
Yes, I was that was kind of an advanced medic, and they called me a clinical specialist.
I see.
Yeah, and so I trained at Fitzsimmons General Hospital in Denver, and when I was there in '69, a lot of people that had been badly injured in Vietnam were there, recuperating from their injuries. A lot of people there had their legs blown off, arms blown off. And so I saw a lot of people in wheelchairs and
so you were intimately involved.
Yes,
at that point.
Yeah, right. Right.
This is before you went over there.
Right. So when I finished that course in August of 1970, I had 30 days leave, and then I arrived in Vietnam in September of 1970, and I was in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. I was assigned to a unit that was called the 1st Squadron, 10th Cavalry. When we were attached to the 4th Infantry Division at Fort Radcliffe, and our primary duty, as far as the 1st of the 10th Cav was concerned, was to keep a highway open called QL-19, and that was a heavily traveled highway for convoys and other vehicles that the U.S. used. So we had like 3 fire bases and a support base that ran along that QL-19 road.
The Central Highlands in Vietnam, that was in North Vietnam or South Vietnam?
It was in what we would call South Vietnam, but it was in the I would say it was in the northern part of South Vietnam.
That's my question. Yes.
Yeah, right.
Close to where they were coming from.
Yeah, there was during the early part of the Vietnam War, there was a lot of stuff that occurred there in the Central Highlands. There was a lot of battles that were fought and a lot of violence in that area. I got to Vietnam, and like I say, in September 1970, I was seeing the rapid disintegration of American involvement in Vietnam. So I was seeing the homicides, the suicides, the rampant heroin addiction, shootouts. The war was really winding down, and a lot of internal problems. We'd get hit every once in a while by a rocket or a mortar round or a sapper attack, but I was seeing a lot of stuff that was just internal violence.
So those things you just mentioned, those were occurring in the American troops there?
Yes, they were, yeah.
And you witnessed all of that? Yeah,
I witnessed quite a bit of it, especially with a drug addiction. We had, heroin addiction in my unit was pretty rampant. And by that time, by 1970, 71, I think a lot of that was kind of the Woodstock generation of soldiers that were in Vietnam. And I think a lot of that generation, as opposed to those that were over there in 66, 67, 68, the group that I was with in Vietnam, let's say between 1970, 71, 72, I think a lot of the people that were in Vietnam at that time were more aware that the war was a war of deceit.
A war of deceit?
Yes, it was.
What do you mean by that, a war of deceit?
Well, we were being, let's face it, the war was started, in August of 1964 it started during the Gulf of Tonkin incident. President Lyndon Johnson claimed that there was a couple of American ships that were attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. One was the USS Maddox and the Turner Joy, and those events did not happen.
That was a fiction.
It was all fiction. It was all based on lies. The United States wanted to get into Vietnam. In other words, I think if anybody wants to understand the real history of Vietnam, they have to go back to the French involvement in Vietnam, because the French had completely occupied Vietnam and probably Cambodia and Laos, that area, for 80 to 100 years. So they had colonized those areas, and so and it was for profiteering for the French, and it was imperialism. It was all it was imperialism. And then when the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the baton was simply passed to the United States.
You know, we've jumped way ahead of ourselves here. Let's back up a little more and talk about a little more about you personally.
Sure.
Did I ask you about when and where you were born?
Well, I was born June 20th, 1945. It's interesting. I just got to reading a book on Audie Murphy. Audie Murphy, of course, was the most decorated soldier in World War II. He and I shared the same birthday. I'm just throwing that out because I find it kind of ironic.
Yeah.
And, you know, he had a lot of post-traumatic stress in his own personal life, and of course I didn't have his experience, and nothing close to what he experienced, but I certainly have had a great deal of post-traumatic stress. But I was born in Washington, D.C. at Walter Reed General Hospital. My father was a career military officer, and he was stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. And so my sister and I were actually delivered by the same doctor. She was about 3 years older than me. And shortly after I was born, I think I was about 18 months old, my father got orders for Tokyo, Japan, and we were some of the first dependents to arrive in Japan after the war.
I was in Yokohama for 27 months in the occupation, remember?
Right.
Okay, I got a trick question for you.
What's that?
Why were you born?
Why was I born?
That's a gotcha.
I know that's a tough question. I'd have to think about that. But I think I was born to be an artist, photographer, writer, poet, and I see my job here as to simply bearing witness about my own history, and certainly Vietnam was something that totally altered my core belief system, based on what I came out of, as far as being a child of a World War II veteran, very patriotic family, and when I came back from Vietnam and realized that the entire Vietnam War was a lie, it totally dismantled my belief system.
And you learned that pretty fast.
It took a few years, but I think probably after I'd been back from Vietnam about maybe 5 years, then I started seeing the full picture. Yes.
How long were you in Vietnam?
I was there exactly a year. I got to Vietnam in, I believe, September 20th, 1970, and I left almost a year to the day in 1971.
Were you glad to leave?
I was ready to leave, yeah, because my unit was deactivating, and things were getting really bad in my unit from an internal environment, and so I even got my life threatened when I was over there by some fellow soldiers that were in my unit, because I was the chief medic in my unit. There was a lot of heroin in my unit, and there were medics that were addicted to heroin. And what I started doing is I started locking up all the syringes and needles and anything that would keep the other medics from obtaining those supplies to use in shooting up heroin. So I became kind of a threat to them. And so when I got threatened, I talked to my squadron doctor at the time, and he sent me out to another fire base for about 2 weeks until things cooled down, because I was I was involved in trying to get rid of medics that were addicted to heroin, because I didn't want them in my unit. And when I came back after that 2 weeks of being on that other fire base, I changed my tune. I decided that I wasn't going to do that anymore, because I was afraid I was going to get killed.
Yeah, I just remembered in the occupation in Yokohama, I shot up twice with heroin,
Wow.
main line, and OD'd, not really OD'd, but I didn't know what it was about. And the goofy GI who shot me up gave me so much, I was just out of it, and they put me to bed. And that's another side story anyhow.
Yeah.
But let's talk some more about you. Anything significant about your racial or cultural heritage? Mike Hasty, what kind of name is
I think it's Irish. You know, my ancestors came over just like all of us. You know, came through and arrived in New York City, Ellis Island.
Yeah.
And part of my lineage is Native American.
How much Native American?
1/16. My great grandparents were full-blooded Snoqualmie Indians, and so that's my claim to fame as far as being connected to Native American history. So I think when I came back from Vietnam, I began to understand American history at a much deeper level. I began to understand what really happened with the genocide of the American Indian. I certainly began to understand black history better. I certainly began to understand what's going on with the Israeli-Palestinian situation. And
even back then, you had an appreciation.
Well, yeah, because I think when I came back from Vietnam later in life, when I got more involved in some of those things, like I made a trip to Palestine about 2 years ago, and I was involved in several demonstrations over there, and I was filming a lot of the Palestinians who were launching rocks with their slingshots at the Israeli Defense Force, and when I saw them slinging those slingshots and releasing those rocks at the Israeli soldiers, what I saw in that moment was an American Indian with a bow and arrow, you know, defending himself.
You pictured that at that time.
Defending himself against the U.S. cavalry. That's what I saw when I was over there. So.
How did you get to be like that, the kind of person you are, with those kinds of concerns and involvement and witnessing? How did you get to be that way, Mike?
I think, you know, that's always a good question as far as why some people gravitate toward, peace and justice issues, and certainly concern for the downtrodden and the abused and the oppressed, as opposed to somebody who goes in an entirely different direction and does whatever they can to fulfill their own life, and often doing it in a very selfish manner. I never saw myself as being selfish. I always was a supporter of the downtrodden and the oppressed.
Your brothers and sisters or your parents, any of them had those kinds of thoughts that you have?
I don't, not to the degree that I had. I have to say that they did. My sister, I'm a registered nurse. My sister was also a registered nurse. So, and my daughter is a registered nurse. I've been married twice. Both those women were registered nurses. So I come from a long lineage or a long history of people that that work in the health field. So
is that a genetic inheritance?
Oh, I don't know. It must be. 'Cause my daughter just recently graduated from nursing school about
your daughter
6 months ago.
Oh, for God's sake!
So she's got a promising career ahead of her. She wants to work in pediatrics. I worked in, several hospital situations, and one of the things that I gravitated to was working in emergency rooms, because that just seemed to come second nature with me, working with critically injured people. So.
Oh my gosh! I'd like to get you on the couch one day and find a little deeper where that comes from. It's marvelous. It's commendable.
Well,
more people need to be like that, particularly in our country, in our society.
Sure. I think one of the things I saw is that I saw how my life experiences were all interrelated, and I think I just have this quest or a deep desire to be introspective about my life and try to figure out how certain things are connected. How was Vietnam connected to my childhood? I think Vietnam obviously forced me to re-examine my entire belief system. Because I remember writing something with one of my photographs, and basically it said, whenever the truth threatens one's core belief system, there's an urgent instinct to deny its reality. And I think that's why so many people are in denial about what the United States government did in Vietnam. I think that everything that happened during the Vietnam War is certainly a threat to the vast majority of the people living in America as far as their core belief system is concerned. Because most Americans like to think that the United States is the greatest country in the world, and that we have these great leaders, and they're altruistic and want the best for the world. But that is not what I learned in Vietnam.
We're taught that, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
As
exactly.
American citizens,
Yeah, we are taught that. If I were to ask somebody, or say, if I were to present a question to somebody, let's say the average citizen in the United States, and tell them that since the end of World War II, the United States has bombed 29 countries, they would find that unbelievable.
29 countries since the end of World War II.
Right.
Bombed them.
Yes.
And we're still bombing them.
Yes, we are. And I see no difference between what happened in Vietnam with what's happening currently in the Middle East. It's the same war of exploitation and greed. Let's face it, I felt like I was a Wall Street soldier in Vietnam.
Before our discussion is over today, maybe you'll tell me what we need to do to change that. Let's continue on with who you are. And religious preference. You want to talk about
no real religious preference.
Yeah. How about your formal education, RN, and what else?
Well, I graduated from high school in 1963, went to community college for probably about 3-4 years, and then I got an associate degree in Eugene at Lane Community College, and then I got accepted to nursing school in 1976 in Portland, and so I went to 3 years of nursing school and graduated from nursing school in 1979. And so that's kind of where I'm at. As far as formal education, obviously, I think most of my own, what I consider being an educated person, has come on my own.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I hear where you're coming from.
Yeah.
That's sort of like me, too. What do you do now in your retirement? How do you spend your time? You're not working anymore, are you?
No, I retired a number of years ago. I've been working in the anti-war movement for the past 30 years, and I simply continue to do that. I travel all over this country. I take my photo essay and have had it on display in a lot of different venues. I've been overseas. I've been to London. I've been to Nicaragua. I've made a trip back to Vietnam. I was in Palestine.
And you carry your stuff with you?
Yeah, I carry some of that stuff with me, and I've given some lectures and some workshops, and I've spoken in all of the high schools in the Portland area. What I do is I go in with a couple of vets, and we simply go into the classes, and we present information to the students that the military recruiters would not reveal to them. So we try to give them a reality, a sense of reality as far as what happens in war.
What kind of reception do you get?
Excellent. Excellent. I cannot tell you the number of students that have walked up to me and thanked me for being in their class. Happens constantly.
I'm tempted to ask you what percentage of those people who hear your presentation go to Canada when they're required to go to village.
No, that's hard to say because things have changed a little bit. With there's not a draft now, and so yeah.
So that's an enjoyable way you're spending your life.
I enjoy it. What it is? It's just you're just bearing witness about the truth. There's an old saying. I think it says, "There is no rest for the messenger until the message has been delivered," and that's what I do.
And it's going to be a long time before the message is delivered
Yeah.
to enough people that it'll make a difference.
Sure.
So you have a partner, a boyfriend, girlfriend, wife?
No,
husband,
I have an old. I've been married and divorced twice, and then I'm actually seeing a friend of mine, a woman I graduated from high school with. She and I were in a brief relationship about 40 years ago, and she's married and divorced, and so she lives in Pullman, Washington. So occasionally I'll go up and see her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So good, you got somebody.
Yeah, so
that's cool.
But I pretty much, for the past 30 years, have pretty much lived on my own.
Children?
One daughter, age 44. She was born in Vietnam. I'm sorry. She was born when I was in Vietnam.
Yes.
So anyway, I wasn't there when she was born in Richland, Washington. She's been her mom and I were divorced when she was about 4, and I've stayed in real close contact with my daughter and also my ex-wife. So she and I are still very good friends. And I visit my daughter, and she lives in Tampa, and I visit her twice a year. And I have 3 grandkids. Unfortunately, my 19-year-old grandson was killed in a motorcycle accident about 3 years ago. So
it must have been hard to do.
It was very difficult, very, very difficult. So I have a granddaughter that's 24, and I have another granddaughter that's 13. So
you're getting old.
I'll be 70 on June 20th.
Oh, my, just a spring chicken compared to me, A dumb question. Your political persuasion, are you a Tea Party member,
no.
Bircher or what?
No, I don't have any political affiliation. I'm not a conservative, not a liberal. I think if somebody would say, where are you at in the political spectrum, I would say I was a conservative radical.
Hello. I'm not going to touch that. All right. Memberships in political or social or civic organizations other than Veterans for Peace. Do you have any other memberships worth mentioning?
No, I think not really. I think most of what I do has been in that organization to some degree or another. I'm not really a member of any other group.
You don't have time.
I don't have time, probably. I think probably a good answer to that.
How about heroes, people you look up to back in your life, or anybody alive today that you particularly admired or look up to? I've got my own list, but who comes to mind for you?
For me, I would have to say that Ho Chi Minh is probably one of my heroes. I think, obviously, Martin Luther King, without question.
Why Ho Chi Minh?
Ho Chi Minh was everything I wish America stood for. What the Vietnamese had to do to defend themselves against the most powerful political, military machine in the world was unbelievable. What they had to do to resist us. And that's why I have a tremendous respect for Ho Chi Minh and also General Giap. I wish I could have met both of those men. Yet we demonize them in this country, and it's always interesting. When the most powerful military force that's ever existed in the face of the earth relentlessly bombed one of the poorest countries in the world, and we did it day in and day out for about 8 to 10 years.
You better be careful what you're saying, because the NSA is going to be watching you, and they're coming after you. You're on 34 lists for sure.
I'm probably a big fish in a bathtub, so I don't worry about it.
Let's take a little break for a few minutes and gather our wits, and then we'll come back and talk some more about your photographs.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you.
Mike, looks like we're back. And thanks for staying tuned. And for you viewers who missed the opening of the show, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. It's a show where I interview interesting individuals, people who are interesting, like you viewers out there, about who they are and about what it is they want to talk about. And Mike has been on before, as I said earlier, and we talked about Vietnam and his adventures and how he got to be in Vietnam and other things. And I had to have him back on again because he's quite an artist and quite a bleeding heart, if I may. And I was so fascinated with what you said before and what you showed our viewers, so I had to have you back on.
Good, thank you.
So thank you again for coming back on again. So let's start again, where you will be showing us some of your photographs and talking about those photographs and whatever else comes to mind for you. So please start.
Well, I think what I'll do is I brought about, I don't know, maybe about 40 images. I'm going to start out with just kind of some, what I would, if I were going to put together a photo essay tonight and show them to a group, the first half a dozen will be kind of introductory photographs, kind of what I call signature pictures of mine.
Sure.
This is a helicopter, a medevac helicopter that was in my unit in Vietnam. Obviously, the crew had painted the word "why" on the front, as in "why are we there?" And so this picture has been on the internet quite a bit, and I use this photograph a lot. If I have some plans, and as far as hoping to put a book together someday of all my images, along with some writing that are under the photographs, because I put a lot of text under my writing, under my pictures. So. This was certainly one of several dust-off helicopters that was in my unit, and I decided to put the words by a man by the name of Tom Comiskey under this particular image. He was a Vietnam veteran, was in Vietnam from 1965 to 1966, and I'll just simply read what he wrote. And anyway. He says here, "My worst moment in Vietnam, after a major operation and casualties at Charlie Med, when the excitement was over, my buddy Bob and I surveyed the helicopter pad. The dead Marines, 49 by our count, were neatly laid out along the pad. We looked at each face. Only 5 or 6 needed a shave. The whole group were pinned down under fire for 2 days. They were so young. Bob and I said nothing, looked at each other, and cried." And the words just seem to go with this image. So I'm really grateful for his writing, and I really can't remember where I pulled that writing out of, but I've always used that his quote with this photograph.
I can guess that one of the ingredients for your PTSD today, with what you just said.
Yes, and then this next picture is a picture that what I did is it's a recruitment poster, Uncle Sam recruitment poster. What I did is I went into a shop one day and when I was living in Spokane, Washington, about maybe 20 years ago, and I had already photographed the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. The first time I saw the wall and photographed it was in 1986. And so probably a number of years later, I walked into the store, saw this 1968 recruitment poster, and what I did is I superimposed the Uncle Sam image over the names on the wall. And I simply, at the bottom, I have a statement that I use quite often in my writings, and then when I display my photographs, in fact, there's an outside chance that it might be the title of a book. And it just simply says here, lying is the most powerful weapon in war. So I think that, for me, that says a lot. Another image that...
so there's a lot of lying by America. And
yes. I think that's probably the most, I think it's the greatest, single most deceitful thing that we do in wars today is we simply lie about why we're there. and so we sell the product to the American people to support the war, so that people go in the military and go over and fight for what I call the corporate elite, because war is about profit. And I'd like to get a T-shirt someday that says, when politicians start sending their kids to war, I'll start believing in noble causes. Anyway, this is a picture of this is an M60 machine gun, and it was mounted on a vehicle called an armored personnel carrier.
Yeah,
and on the front of the armored personnel carrier is a 50 caliber machine gun, and on the sides of the small vehicle, actually it's not real small, but it carries probably a number of troops. I don't know what what it could carry, but I would imagine as many as 20 people could get on it if they had to. Anyway, this was the armored personnel carrier pulled up to our aid station one day. There was one of the crew members had a minor injury, and so I was looking at the gun, the M60, that was pointed basically at the ground, and so I took a photograph of it, and not thinking what I would do with it, but I just took a photograph. And this is the gun turret here that's in the background. And when I got back from Vietnam, and I started realizing and putting all the puzzle pieces together, and it was believed that the average age of American soldiers that were killed in Vietnam was 19 years and 10 months old. And some people question that. Some people say it was almost 21, but that figure of 19, almost being 20, is a figure that's been thrown around for decades. So what I did is I took the word 19 and I turned it into a machine gun belt. And what it is it's 19-year-old boys being spit out of an M60 machine gun for profit. And that's what the Vietnam War was about. And so that was for me is a very succinct piece of art. So, and
are you against profit?
I'm not. I'm against profit when people are doing it in a deceitful manner. And this is a photograph that I personally consider one of the ones I love the most. I went back to Washington, D.C. to photograph the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in 1986. That was the first time I went back. And I had particular photographs that I was interested in getting because I'd written some poetry. And I had a Nikon camera with a 100 to 300 zoom mounted on a monopod that I used quite a bit. I used other lenses, but in the taking of this photograph, I was off at a fair distance with this zoom lens, and it was set at 300 millimeters. I was using Tri-X film, and I saw this small girl, looked like she was probably about 6, I want to say, and she was standing right by the wall, and there was about 6 segments of the wall in the photograph. This being one segment here, this is another segment, and obviously the whole image is not in this particular print, but there was 6 segments of the wall, and she was the only person that was there. Her parents were there, but they were off to the side somewhere, and so there was quite a few names that were visible with only her in the photograph. And I took about 3 photographs, and I caught this image. It was I considered obviously a very lucky shot. Because I couldn't really see all of what was going on. I had a feeling there was something going on, but I had no idea of the emotional, gripping feeling that this photograph meant to me. Because what she did, she put her hands to her side, she slightly bowed her head, and she closed her eyes. And I took the photograph. And so I used this picture a lot. And the quote under it, for me, is very powerful. It's written by a friend of mine, a Vietnam veteran friend of mine by the name of Nicholas James Weber. He's from Seattle. He saw combat in Vietnam. And I'll just read the quote. It says here, "As God walks atop this wall and weeps, I hear him say, 'These were my sons.' The sound of his tears falls silenced as hands are washed in the Potomac, and it runs red with waste the Pontius Pilates of the New Rome repeat history on full automatic. And,
oh my gosh. You wrote that?
Yes, he wrote that, my friend Nick Weber. I'm going to show you 3 pictures of medics that were taken to my unit. This man was Ed Tenberg. I use a quote by Malcolm X under it. He simply says here, Malcolm X, the only thing worse than death is betrayal. And here's another photograph of our platoon sergeant. He was a medic, spent 2 tours in Vietnam, and was probably one of the most outstanding people I met when I was in Vietnam. He was like a father figure to us. Mm-hmm. And then here's another medic friend of mine. His name was John Lowe. John Lowe was a full-blooded Creek Indian from Henrietta, Oklahoma. He spent 2 tours in Vietnam. And sad to say that last year he died from exposure to Agent Orange. He had cancer, so he passed away. And yes, and my brother-in-law died from Agent Orange exposure.
How is it that some people do more than 1 tour in Vietnam?
Well, most of the people that I met that were in Vietnam, most of them only spent 1 tour, but there were those who did spend more than 1. Usually the people that spent more than 1 were in the military a little bit longer, certainly than the draftees. The draftees had a commitment of 2 years, and so they did their year in Vietnam, came back, and they got out of the military. But there were some that stayed in the military longer, and of course if they did, certainly there were a lot of people, what they call career soldiers, that spent 2, maybe even 3 tours in Vietnam. They were older. Like the platoon sergeant that I showed you earlier was a man that was about 35, 36. We were all in our early 20s. Some of us were still teenagers. So this is an image that I put together. This is a G.I. Joe figure. Mm-hmm. He stands about, probably about 8 inches tall. This is a very provocative, powerful image. I have him holding a sign that just simply says, "My toy soldiers didn't kill civilians." And I think that this is one of the things that people are not aware of in this country. They think that the killing of civilians is collateral damage, and that is not true. You do not bring the enemy to the peace table by just killing military combatants. You ultimately bring the enemy to the peace table by killing innocent civilians. They are military targets. And this strategy is as old as warfare itself.
It's been going on for a long time.
It's been going on since the Roman days. So that's what people don't want to talk about, that civilians were killed on purpose in Vietnam. I made a trip back to Vietnam in '94, went to the My Lai massacre site. There was about 504 that were killed at My Lai. A lot of people think that was just that kind of event didn't happen very often in Vietnam. But let me tell you, there were a lot of My Lais in Vietnam, a lot of My Lais, and a lot of those My Lais were what I call My Lais from the skies, which were either bombing raids or artillery fire. So, and here's another.
Is America exceptional in that kind of warfare, that kind of bombing and destroying civilians? Is America an exception, or do other countries do the same sort of?
I'm sure. Other countries. We did it. I mean, the United States did it, and during World War II, we did it when we bombed Japan. We did it when we bombed Germany, and I certainly the British did it. The French did it. I would say that just probably most governments that have major military forces around the world have committed those kind of atrocities. Certainly the Turks did it against the Armenian the Armenians I think in 19th century.
Is war inevitable as long as humans are on this earth? Is war inevitable?
Well, I go back to a quote. It's a biblical quote, and I use it because I think there's a lot of truth to it. and it talks about that for the love of money is the root of all evil. And I think that you have countries that exploit other countries because that's what empires do. We certainly saw it with the Germans, the Japanese, the U.S., the British, the French, you name it. So I think that it's inevitable from that standpoint, and I think that a lot of it has to do with the lust for money and power and expansion, which of course the United States has been an expansionist country. Probably we started becoming a major expansionist country during the war with Spain and the Philippines. And so, anyway, this is an image. I don't know why I took this down. This is an image I took I took it in Salem, Oregon. The moving wall was on display in Salem, Oregon, in 1989, in a big, huge warehouse. And I saw this empty chair, and under it had this banner that said "Welcome Home, Vietnam Veterans." And for some reason, that sign and an empty chair is kind of like what a lot of us felt when we came back from Vietnam. We were not supported by our country. We were blamed for the loss of the war. We were scapegoated, and the United States government never took responsibility for their own actions. So, this is an image here that I took at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Portland.
Wow.
This is both of these are Vietnam veterans. I believe I took this on Veterans Day, probably about 15, 20 years ago. This veteran on the left is comforting the other veteran on the right. You can see this man on the right is cupping this man's hand, and I just saw that, and I could see the deep emotion and grief involved in this photograph. And it was a quick shot. I consider myself very lucky to have gotten it.
What were you shooting? Plus X?
I was shooting a black and white film. I just can't recall at the time what it was. It could have been Tri-X 400.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is a picture of another. This was the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Portland. This is a man that was pouring down raining. The wall was dedicated, I believe, I think it was dedicated in 1986. And so anyway, this man was the Vietnam veteran was just standing there. He had been, obviously he's a disabled vet, and he was standing there, and there was something about the look in his eye that drew me to him as he's looking at one of the monuments there. So.
Interesting. I was just thinking, I wonder what's going on in his mind as I saw his face, and you made your comment about there's something in his face.
Yes. This is a picture of a man that was at the moving wall in Salem, Oregon. When I took that picture of the empty chair under that banner, that would have been in 1988, I believe. This man, his name was Joe. He was a Marine, and he was at the Battle of Quezon. Mm. And after the ceremony, and people went up to the moving wall, and had their moments with the names. After the ceremony, this Vietnam veteran was talking to this woman, and he was showing a lot of grief. And so anyway, I just took the photograph very quickly.
Say a few words about the moving wall. What is the moving wall?
Well, the moving wall is a replica of the original Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. I think it's about 2/3 of the size of the original wall. I believe there's two of them, one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast, and they travel all over the country on a daily basis. So I've seen the moving wall probably in about 4 different locations. Okay. Here's another image that was taken at the actual Vietnam Veterans Memorial at the wall in Washington, D.C. when I first photographed the wall there. I was standing near the apex of the wall, talking to a friend, and all of a sudden this woman started to break down. And I quote, I have a quote under it that's by a Vietnam veteran by the name of William Broyles Jr. And basically he just says here, those who come to the wall become part of it. They touch it, rub it, sing to it, pray against it, and they talk to it. The wall is like a character in a play whose silence makes all the other characters speak. So, and then here's an image that I took. I took this at a Veterans Day parade in Albany, Oregon, in about I'm going to say around 1993. There were a bunch of small boys, probably ages 10, 11, 12 years old, and they were on a flatbed truck. This truck was in the parade on the parade route, and they were all pointing plastic pistols and guns at people along the parade route. And I just got a real close-up shot of this young boy pointing a pistol at me. And I wrote something at the bottom. I just wrote here, I said, every time you buy a boy a violent toy, you trample his soul. And I took several pictures that day of a lot of other boys that were on that flatbed truck. Here's another image that I took at a it was at a carnival, actually a fair in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, probably around 1999. This is a picture. This flip chart just happened to be in the background. This military recruiter was at the fairgrounds, and they were putting camouflage war paint on a lot of children. And I got a picture of this boy. You can see the stress in his face as this recruiter is putting this war paint on him. And this flip chart, like I say, it was a blank flip chart in the background. And I just had a friend of mine do calligraphy on it, and it just says child abuse. And that's basically how I feel. Here's an image that I took of a woman that was a third-generation victim of Agent Orange. She was with a group of other Vietnamese that were traveling across the United States. Her name was Juan. She was 21 years old, and we were at this picture was taken in Pittsburgh, and we went to an American Legion building, and I saw these American flags that were that were lined up, and these are different campaigns and wars that the U.S. has been involved in. So I asked her if she would back in there and let me take a picture of her with those American flags. To me, that's profound, because the spraying of Agent Orange in Vietnam, as far as I'm concerned, was one of the greatest war crimes ever committed.
That's a powerful thing you just said.
That's a powerful statement I just said. So anyway.
Where are her legs?
Yes, she lost. Obviously, she was born with no legs, and then she was born with no hand.
Oh, I didn't notice.
Yes,
that.
no hand.
My God.
So that was.
Is there any doubt that Agent Orange has that kind of effect genetically on subsequent generations?
Yes. Yeah, certainly you see it with Americans that were exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam, and how that's been transferred to their children and grandchildren. I have seen that on numerous occasions.
Has that been accepted by the authorities or by the government in America?
No, they are bearing that reality, just like they're bearing the reality of depleted uranium that the United States used in the Middle East. Here's a picture of a man that was grieving at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Portland, Oregon on Veterans Day. So I just got a quick shot of him.
So much sadness and grief as a result of the Vietnam War. And
this is a picture of a friend of mine. He's holding up a banner that says America.
We've only got a couple of minutes left.
Okay, this is a friend of mine. He was a medic. He was a soldier in Vietnam. He's holding up a banner. He's an artist, and it just says America's dying. And I wrote under here, I said multiple tours are killing Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. And then I wrote here, I said multiple wars are killing Vietnam veterans. And that's why you're seeing so many Vietnam veterans, even now, committing suicide, because of all the wars that have happened since Vietnam. It's the same war happening at a different time and a different place. I want to show you a picture of of the infamous ditch at My Lai, when the United States, when the Americal Division went into My Lai in
Cali?
In 1968, certainly Lieutenant Calley was involved in that. He basically was the only person that was tried and convicted. He was essentially the fall guy.
Yeah.
This was a military operation. There are a number of people that should have been sent to prison but weren't. This is I went back to Vietnam in 1994. I went to the My Lai massacre site. This is the infamous ditch where where American troops herded over 100 civilians in this ditch, and they killed them at point-blank range. And that day, 504 Vietnamese civilians were murdered by American troops. A lot. If you were to ask kids nowadays, I've recently spoken a couple of college classes, and I asked juniors and seniors if they ever heard of the My Lai massacre. I did this in 3 classes, and not one hand went up. Nobody knew about it.
Oh, this is fantastic. Yeah. You've done it again.
Well, thanks.
Thanks again.
I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, we have a couple of public service announcements. If you want to watch my shows on the web, Google Don Baham YouTube. Lots of shows on there. And we got to talk about the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. Our civil liberties are in jeopardy in Washington, D.C. We've got to reclaim our civil liberties. Go to that website, www. whatever it is. Okay. Google ACLU. Learn how to end corporate personhood. Go to movetoamend.org to end corporate personhood, because corporations are not persons, as the Supreme Court said, and money is not speech. So it's not speech for you. And I got to thank you for watching, and I want to thank you for watching. Remember KFC. Oh, KFC, that's important. Not Kentucky Fried Chicken. Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind. Be friendly. Be charitable to you too, and to you too, and to you too.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, sir.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Yeah, we got to find a seat. We'll get you back on it.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
This is a good job.
Is it okay? Will I come across this?
Oh yeah.